The war in Ukraine rages on. Russian attacks continue. It is a merciless conflict that claims many lives. A war waged with no regard for the environment. Chemical factories, oil depots, industrial complexes, power plants. The repeated targets of kamikaze drones and rockets. The implications for the natural world are dramatic. Ukrainian environmental inspectors are appalled.
Я не знаю, как это комментировать, потому что, честно говоря, ну вот мы выезжали как экологи, но вот на такое руйнование вот мы первый раз.
Kremenchuk, in the northeast of Ukraine. The city is around 100 kilometers from the front lines. 3 environmental inspectors are examining an area that was the focal point of a Russian attack just a few months ago. There is not much left of the shopping center. Most of the debris has already been cleared away. Video surveillance cameras show what happened here. The 27th of June, 2022, 3:52 in the afternoon. The shopping center is busy as a cruise missile strikes about 50 meters away. Ukrainian officials report that 20 are killed. An area of 28,000 square meters is set ablaze. It is the worst attack on Kremenchuk to date, an incident that official Ukrainian environmental inspectors are not willing to let out of their sights. Even after so many deaths, they must continue their work.
Дослідження, то есть мы взяли анализы воздуха, и вы себе даже не можете представить, с такого небольшого торгового одного центра, да, выкиды в атмосферу составили 2200 тонн вредных веществ в атмосферную среду. Это колоссальные выбросы, которые они ушли в атмосферу, и они где-то, каким-то образом, они все равно вернутся на земную кору.
Investigators document the damage the conflict has brought to the surroundings. They firmly believe in the importance of their work, even when the focus is on human suffering and environmental devastation.
Это очень важно, потому что без экологии жизнь человека тоже невозможна. И любые вот эти взрывы, они приносят не только смерть, но и вред здоровью людям, которые выжили.
International environmental organizations are becoming increasingly concerned by the conflict. The Russian attacks often focus on critical infrastructure. As of December 2022, over 1,100 attacks on more than 580 targets have been documented. Heavy industry is particularly hard hit, with unforeseeable consequences for the environment. In Utrecht, in the Netherlands, the effects of the war in Ukraine are being closely monitored. Wim Svenenberg, working for the peace organization PAX, analyzes and verifies developments in the war.
This is now, of course, the first time in a long period that there is intense fighting in a heavy industrialized country. And it has a heavy mine industry, but it also has a lot of chemical industrial facilities in the west of the country which were targeted. And that level of damage also poses new industrial or technical risks, as they are called. And that will require more capacity to understand what potential risks are, because we are dealing with serious risks for either for people or for ecosystems.
Wim Svenenberg analyzes combat reports every day, both in the press and on social media. He compares the reports with high-resolution satellite images to uncover what is really happening on the ground.
So here, for example, we see a thermal power plant which was hit during the conflict by Russia. It's severely damaged, and that's where very high-resolution imagery is very helpful to identify the damage. And apart from the damage to the facility itself, we also see all these tankers storing heavy fuel oil, which were damaged, and you can see the spills here in the zoom in, where all the heavy fuel oil is leaking into the area, and all the area is contaminated with heavy fuel.
Every incident is documented and ranked. The database aims to evaluate the severity of the destruction and its consequences.
The risk of pollution also depends on what type of substance is leaking and, of course, the amount. And then you have to look at how people can be exposed to it or how can ecosystems be affected. So in terms of oil pollution, the oil can get, first you get the burning of oil, so you create a large amount of air pollution, which is at the moment itself a direct risk for people living downwind from a burning facility. There's oil spills. Again, it depends on the amount getting into the environment, but like if it's a substantial amount, it can contaminate groundwater.
The contested regions in the east of Ukraine are particularly affected. No one yet knows the true extent of the destruction and what consequences this will have for the environment. Ecologists Tetiana Kalembet and Svetlana Solonko are on their way to Apostolovo, a small town near the front lines that frequently comes under fire. Over 50 private homes and multiple public buildings, including this school, have been damaged. For some time, the military deemed the area too dangerous for civilians. Today is the first time environmental inspectors have been granted permission to enter Apostolovo.
Кошмар. Кошмар. Так вообще не определить, где как были залы или эти. Ой, кошмар.
Сплошное месиво.
Before the war, they had to deal with minor environmental infractions, illegally disposed of garbage, untreated sewage. Now, this.
Громада, когда закон вступил в новую силу, за свои деньги построила шикарную, великолепную школу, современную. И сейчас это, то есть забирается у наших детей будущее. Помимо там вреда для окружающей среды, просто у наших детей уничтожается какой-то вера, я не знаю, в будущее там или какой-то такой, не знаю. Я даже не знаю, как это комментировать, потому что, честно говоря, мы выезжали как экологи, но вот на такое руйнування мы первый раз.
Посмотрим вот там, вот обойдем.
It is not the only school in Apostolovo that has been hit. All three have been destroyed. While at first glance environmental damage might not be the biggest problem, there are considerable risks for both people and the local ecosystem.
Может быть асбестом. В своем содержании асбест содержит важкие металлы, мы будем делать, сульфаты мы будем делать, щільний залишок мы будем делать. И так как это здесь есть и крыша, какие-то битумные перекрытия, будем пробовать еще органические расчинники.
In the lab, they immediately get to work. Many locals have fled from the region due to the attacks and desperate living conditions without electricity, heating or water. But they have stayed.
Вся страна у нас працює на то, чтобы мы могли существовать, жить, работать. Ну и все, конечно, надеются, что мы не можем все сейчас бросить и ничего не делать. То есть это второй фронт.
Odessa, in the south of Ukraine. The port city on the Black Sea has been repeatedly targeted by Russian rockets. The sea itself has also become a theatre of war. Marine biologist Alexander Kurakin is trying to document what is happening underwater, but it's not so easy.
Во времена войны, конечно, у нас в связи с тем, что обстановка на водоемах достаточно напряженная и везде, скажем, стоит охрана, связана с определенными трудностями. И, соответственно, нырять приходится гораздо реже. То есть, вот в этом году у нас было там всего, наверное, дней 15, которые мы провели в поле.
Before the war, Kurakin spent 5 months at sea every year. Now, large sections are mined. the coast is now an exclusion zone. To carry out this dive on the shoreline, he needs a special permit from the military. Kurakin uses every opportunity to inspect what traces the war has left behind.
Землю, море так терзать и громить на протяжении столь длительного времени, понятно, что там останется след, и вот в нашу задачу входит как раз определить размер этого следа.
Kurakin has been researching and documenting the fascinating marine ecosystem of the Black Sea for decades. Ecologists have been warning for some time that this unique flora and fauna is under threat from industrial waste and fertilizer residue. Now, the war is also leaving its mark below the water. Spent munitions, mines, but worst of all is the threat posed by oil, from fuel tankers or destroyed ships.
Ну, дело в том, что, в принципе, когда тонет большой военный корабль, загрязнение, если не говорить уже про возможность атомного заражения, то из него поднимается такое количество горюче-смазочных материалов, которые видны даже на спутниковых снимках, то есть видны из космоса. Поэтому, наверное, локальными проблемами это трудно назвать. Скорее, это проблемы достаточно большие, но вот их конкретный размер как раз входит узнать это в нашу задачу.
The air raid sirens in Odessa warn of rockets and drone attacks, a near daily occurrence. The city has lost power, including the Institute of Marine Biology. Here, researchers are investigating the impact of the war on marine life. Despite the challenges posed by these conditions, they continue their work, making do with the lights on their smartphones.
После этих атак, допустим, вообще сутки нету, двое суток нету, а потом, конечно, ну, вот постепенно восстанавливают. И ну, каждый может рассказать вот свою историю, как у него свет включают, могут включить 3 часа ночи, и вот ты встаешь и работаешь в это время. Да, вот когда есть свет, тогда люди уже и работают, то есть они уже не, как бы, да, ну, то есть режим уже и график работы уже зависит, сейчас мы действительно зависим от наличия электричества.
Researchers are unable to collect local samples and instead rely on satellite imagery for their analysis. Of greatest concern are the oil spills they are observing, which currently affect over 20,000 square kilometers of water.
This is practically half area of Ukrainian sector of the Black Sea, including the Azov Sea, covering by oil spills after the military incident within the area.
A catastrophe for the endangered Black Sea, especially as pollution cannot be contained due to mines and constant attacks. The consequences for the fragile ecosystem across all neighbouring countries are currently uncertain. There are approximately 50 national parks in Ukraine and many nature reserves. According to the Ukrainian Ministry of Environmental Protection, Russian forces have destroyed or occupied around 30% of protected sites. A team from the Hamburg University of Applied Sciences is investigating the impact of the war on these sensitive areas.
Ecosystem is a very complicated system, basically, and the war is changing this balance. So if you want to distinguish like the biggest threats, it would be fires, then missile attacks, then mined territory, and then it would be construction from military, like trenches, like all kind of construction you can imagine, when they were digging the soil and changing the surface, and also military waste.
Landmines are not only a serious problem in nature reserves. Ukrainians and Russians have mined large stretches of the contested areas, clearing them is an arduous task. As well as being a threat to life, mines are also a danger for the environment. Unexploded mines decompose over time, seeping their explosives into the soil. Their hazardous chemicals then contaminate the groundwater. Ukraine possesses a unique array of natural resources, and in the years leading up to the conflict, officials had intensified their efforts to conserve this wealth. Maria Fedoruk, herself a refugee, must now watch as their first successes are undone.
Well, actually, we had a lot of problems in Ukraine with nature protection. I have to admit it, of course, before the war as well. But we were really moving forward the European standards, and we started to take part in European Green Deal, and we started to implement circular economy principles also, and it was developing very fast. But now it's slowed down dramatically.
Maria Fedoruk and her colleagues from the Hamburg University of Applied Sciences frequently travel to document the impact of the conflict on nature reserves. The widespread destruction is largely caused by forest fires, ignited by frontline combat operations. Mykolaiv, southeast Ukraine. The region was contested for a long time until Russian troops withdrew. Environmental inspectors Yana Maiboroda and Konstantin Zinkin assess what is left after the forest fires. The trees are still standing. They are dead.
Поэтому это все было в пределах досягаемости как артиллерии обычной, плюс, в основном здесь производились обстрелы с РСЗО. И в связи с тем, что здесь были постоянные обстрелы, то лесничество, земля лесничества, не всегда могли оперативно реагировать на возникающие пожары.
260 hectares of woodland are destroyed. These trees were 30 years old. It will take decades for the forest to regrow. Mykolaiv is only one of several affected areas. Satellite imagery shows raging forest fires and destruction they have wrought in formerly contested areas, as well as the current front lines. In April 2022, a Russian rocket hit the regional administration of Mykolaiv. Before the outbreak of the war, locals relied on tourism. The Black Sea coast and nature reserves were supposed to attract visitors from across Europe. Now, rebuilding is the only focus.
We need to start moving because it will take lots of time, but we need to start move for now with ecological programs for recovering our region. It is very important, and I know that it will take not 1 year. So as far as we start, it will come faster. So I think that we need to start already.
And the war is far from over. In October 2022, there was a devastating attack. A further environmental catastrophe as kamikaze drones hit storage tanks filled with sunflower oil.
З 17 жовтня тут вся територія навколо даного терміналу була залита олією, в прямому смислі цього слова. Повністю олія, ця дитяча площадка з олією. Також з іншої сторони велика кількість олії потрапила в дощову мережу міської каналізації, через яку потрапила до Бузького лиману.
The attack on Mykolaiv resulted in several thousand tons of sunflower oil spilling into the surroundings. The drones set some of the oil ablaze, while the rest flowed into the port. Although the fire brigade managed to pump most of the oil from the water's surface, significant amounts remain, as do the dead animals. Environmental inspectors are concerned about the long-term effects on the ecosystem.
Також для риби, риби в масовому морі не спостерігалось, тому що риба все ж таки цю рослинну олію куштує. Але ж в такій великій кількості це теж може впливати на її репродуктивність. Тому що якщо ця олія осяде на місця нерестилища, де риба відкладає ікру, то вона зверху все покриє і ніякої риби не буде.
Конечно, никто не понимал, и никто даже не мог подумать о масштабах такой войны. С кем вот мы не говорили, не обсуждали эти темы, нам говорили, это невозможно. 4 атомные электростанции. Такой войны не будет, никто этого не допустит. И, к сожалению, мы имеем на сегодняшний день катастрофические последствия. И я так понимаю, что они у нас... Война еще идет, и мы не понимаем, какие дальше нам последствия ожидать.
Nuclear power plants pose a significant danger. Currently, there are 4 in operation, as well as the decommissioned reactors at Chernobyl. In the summer of 2022, a team from Greenpeace Germany visited Chernobyl. They investigated whether there is increased radiation emitted around the reactor after Russian forces occupied this region at the beginning of the war. Measurements did show increased radioactivity in some areas.
Radioactive elements in the Chernobyl area over the decades have sunk deeper and deeper into the ground.
Through the activities of the Russian army, driving through here with tanks and heavy trucks, but also by digging trenches, they have released these radioactive elements back into the air and water systems, thereby endangering people and nature. Europe's largest nuclear power plant is in eastern Ukraine, Zaporizhzhia. It is currently occupied by Russian troops and has been fired upon several times.
It's
directly on the battlefield. That means the danger of reactors being hit by grenades, bombs, or rockets is immense. But another threat looms over Ukraine. Russia has been specifically attacking the electricity grid. While power outages are a common occurrence throughout the country, nuclear power plants depend on a secure power supply. The problem with nuclear power stations is that they have to be connected to the grid. They need a continuous supply of energy to power the cooling systems for the reactors themselves, but also for the spent fuel pits, the areas where used fuel rods are kept. If these cannot be kept adequately cool, then it could lead to a meltdown, like we saw at Fukushima or Chernobyl. War causes severe environmental damage that can last for decades. One of the most striking examples is the Vietnam War. In the 1960s and 70s, the USA and South Vietnam fought against the Communist North. Napalm bombs set forests alight, and the US Air Force used the chemical defoliant Agent Orange to clear forests and destroy crops. Yet the defoliant contained the poisonous chemical dioxin, which contaminated the environment for decades.
Apart from the environmental damage, we also saw in Vietnam that people were affected by, there were a lot of birth defects from pregnant women who were exposed to dioxide in the soil. It created a lot of other health impacts on communities who were faced with that, and it was not cleaned up.
The Gulf War provides another example. In 1990, Iraq invaded the neighboring emirate of Kuwait. An international coalition led by the United States of America pushed them back. But Iraqi troops left behind them scorched earth.
They set fire to over 600 oil wells, which kept burning for over 9 months, even longer, and led to result in a decrease of temperature because the sun was blocked for a long period. And there was like heavy contamination of the soil and the marine, which took a long time to clean up.
Around 240 billion litres of oil was set ablaze, uncontrolled. This is roughly equivalent to double of Germany's annual crude oil consumption. The International Court of Justice ruled that Iraq must pay Kuwait roughly $50 billion as compensation for the environmental damage. This ruling provides Ukraine with a clear case study. Russia should pay for the environmental damage it has wrought. This is why each contamination is meticulously documented.
Тобто наша надія на те, що ми зможемо, по-перше, показати всьому світу, що таке війна проти України, що таке війна проти довкілля, і що кожен, хто наносить шкоду, повинен за це відповідати. В нас є велика надія, що ми зможемо стягнути ці репарації з країни-агресора.
Those at the Ministry of Environmental Protection in Kyiv understand the importance of their work.
Збитків екологічних наразі дуже багато. І є збитки, які залишаються, скажімо, в легенях українців, вони позначаються на здоров'ї українців. І, напевне, ми можемо говорити про кількість лісових пожеж, які спричинені війною. Ми можемо говорити про велику кількість нафтобаз палаючих. Але, напевне, ми ще будемо стикатися по мірі деокупації наших територій, ми будемо стикатися ще з більшими проблемами, які загрожують не лише Україні, бо війна в Україні, самі військові дії обмежуються Україною, а екологічні злочини, вони не обмежуються територією України.
An oil depot near Kyiv. It has been the target of Russian missile attacks 3 times. 10 tanks of oil were destroyed. More than 12 million litres of diesel and petrol set alight. 1 million litres of fuel leaked into the environment. Inspectors and biologists are investigating what consequences this attack will have. They have calculated that 40,000 tons of harmful chemicals entered the atmosphere. Poisonous substances like ammonia, sulfur dioxide, and heavy metals. The detonations were so violent that they damaged the protective systems in place designed to prevent oil and extinguishing water from entering the ground.
Выток, который произошел, он все-таки попал на грунт, на землю. И мы должны это еще понять и оценить, сколько нефтепродуктов или остатков нефтепродуктов вот попало в землю, в грунт, и на какую глубину оно прошло.
The environmental damage caused by these attacks is assessed at around 40 million euros. But officials are unwilling to name just the financial costs. It's about repairing the long-term damage.
Я не могу сейчас ничего сделать для фронта. То есть то, что можно делать, я делаю, но я не военный человек, я там не воюю. Поэтому я пытаюсь сделать что-то на своем месте. И я знаю, что рано или поздно война кончится. И нам нужно будет это все восстанавливать и окружающую среду оживлять, ремедировать, восстанавливать, возобновлять. Вот этим мы сейчас и пытаемся заняться. Но поскольку опыта нет, прецедента нет, это впервые все. Поэтому шаги эти, ну, знаете, как шаги в темном, в потемках.
Ukraine estimates the environmental damage in the first 11 months of war at around 43 billion euros. And there is no end in sight. One thing is certain. The people in Ukraine will suffer from these environmental consequences for generations to come.